A merciless winter wrapped Bozeman in white as a former Navy SEAL, and his rare silver-gray German Shepherd moved through the frozen wilderness at dawn. He had come here to disappear, to bury a past forged in war and steel. Then his dog stopped, not for prey, not for danger, but for something buried beneath the snow. Hidden in a ravine lay an abandoned tank, cold, silent, and very wrong. Inside it was a secret powerful enough to end careers, destroy lives, and turn a man who wanted peace into a hunted target. Walking away would have kept him safe. Digging deeper would make him an enemy. He chose neither fear nor silence. He chose the truth. What he didn't know was this. The secret inside that tank had already marked him, and the hunt had already begun. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances move you, subscribe for more. Morning arrived in Bozeman, Montana, not with gentleness, but with a hard, crystalline brightness that made the world look carved rather than grown. Snow lay thick over the city and the surrounding foothills, a smooth, unbroken white that reflected the rising sun so fiercely it forced the eyes to narrow. The air was brutally cold, clean, sharp, and unforgiving, and every breath carried a faint sting, as if the mountains themselves demanded payment for the privilege of being there. Bozeman was no stranger to winter, but this was the kind that stripped life down to essentials, where survival depended on preparation, instinct, and respect for the land. Ryan Walker moved through this frozen world with the economy of motion that never truly leaves a man who has been trained for war. He was 35, tall and powerfully built without excess, his frame lean and hardened rather than bulky. Years of disciplined conditioning had left his shoulders broad, his posture upright, and his movements precise even when he believed no one was watching. His face was angular, defined by a strong jawline and cheekbones sharpened by cold and time. A close-cropped beard framed his mouth, dark with a few early threads of gray, giving him the look of someone older than his years without making him appear worn. His eyes were a muted steel blue, the kind that seemed calm on the surface but carried depth, calculation, and something permanently guarded beneath. Ryan wore the same thing he wore every day, regardless of weather or occasion. A full Navy working uniform, the digital camouflage pattern uninterrupted across jacket and pants, the design continuous from collar to cuffs, from chest pockets to seams, without a single solid color panel to break it. The fabric was winter appropriate, layered beneath with thermal gear, but the uniform itself was more than protection from the cold. It was a habit, a shield, and a quiet declaration. When he left the Navy SEALs, he never left the hustle identity behind. Some men hung their uniforms in closets as symbols of a chapter closed. Ryan wore his like a promise that nothing had truly ended, only changed shape. He lived alone on the outskirts of Bozeman, where the city thinned into forest and the roads gave way to snow-covered tracks known only to locals and animals. His cabin sat at the edge of the trees, modest and sturdy, built for function rather than comfort. He spoke little to neighbors, went into town only when necessary, and avoided questions by cultivating an air of polite distance. To most people, he was just another quiet veteran who preferred solitude. Only those who looked closely noticed the way he scanned reflections in windows, the way his shoulders tightened at sudden sounds, or how his gaze lingered on the horizon as if expecting something to emerge. At his side moved Arrow. The German Shepherd was 4 years old, large even for his breed, with a powerful chest and long, athletic legs built for endurance, rather than speed alone. What set him apart, however, was his coat, a rare silver gray that shifted in tone depending on the light, sometimes pale as frost, sometimes dark as storm clouds. Black traced the line of his back and face in subtle patterns, giving him an almost mythic appearance against the snow. His ears stood tall and alert, rotating constantly, and his amber eyes missed nothing. Arrow was not merely obedient, he was intelligent in the way working dogs often are, capable of independent judgment when instinct demanded it. Ryan had adopted Arrow shortly after leaving active service. The dog had been younger then, clumsy and oversized for his age, but already watchful. Over time, Arrow had grown into Ryan's constant companion, his silent partner in routines that required no words. Where Ryan was reserved and inward, Arrow was expressive in controlled ways, through posture, tension, and stillness rather than noise. The dog sensed shifts in Ryan's mood long before they surfaced, pressing close when memories grew heavy, standing guard when sleep came uneasy. They had learned each other's rhythm so completely that movement between them often felt synchronized, as if governed by the same nervous system. That morning, they were moving along a familiar hunting path at the edge of the forest, the snow beneath their boots and paws compacted by weeks of repeated use. The light was strong now, turning every breath into a silver plume. Ryan's rifle rested across his back, secure but accessible, more out of habit than expectation. He was not desperate for game. The hunt, like most things in his life now, was less about the result than the process, the focus, the clarity, the quiet. Then Arrow stopped. It was abrupt enough that Ryan noticed instantly. The dog's body stiffened, head lifting, ears snapping forward. His gaze locked onto something beyond the trees, and a low, unfamiliar tension rolled through his frame. This was not the alert posture of prey detection. There was no excited trembling, no forward lean. Instead, Arrow's tail lowered slightly, his muscles coiling as if bracing. "Easy," Ryan murmured, his voice calm but attentive. Arrow did not look back at him. Instead, the dog stepped off the trail and pulled forward, firm and insistent, ignoring the familiar scents they had followed countless times before. Ryan hesitated only a second. Trusting Arrow was not a decision he debated. He followed. They moved downslope, away from the open forest and into a narrow ravine where sunlight struggled to reach the ground. Snow lay deeper here, undisturbed, covering rocks and fallen branches in deceptive smoothness. Ryan adjusted his footing automatically, weight shifting with practiced care, one gloved hand brushing trees for balance. The air felt different, colder, heavier, as if sound itself had been dampened. Then he saw it. At first, it didn't make sense. A shape too straight, too angular to belong to nature, half buried beneath snow and creeping vines. Ryan slowed, his breath fogging the air as recognition crawled up his spine. He stepped closer, pushing aside a curtain of frozen foliage, and the truth emerged in brutal clarity. A tank, old, massive, and unmistakable, its steel hull scarred and dulled by time, but not erased. One side was sunk into the ravine wall, the other exposed, the turret frozen at an unnatural angle. Snow had collected in its seams, vines had claimed its edges, but beneath the white and green lay a machine built for destruction. It looked like a beast that had crawled into the mountains to die and been forgotten. Ryan felt his jaw tighten. Tanks did not simply appear in Montana forests. He reached out and placed his gloved hand against the metal. The cold bit through instantly, sharp and alive. As his fingers traced the surface, something registered that made his stomach drop. Beneath the snow, beneath the corrosion, the steel was cleaner than it should have been. There were marks, recent ones, where snow had been disturbed, where access panels showed signs of being opened and closed. This wasn't abandoned. Arrow let out a sharp bark, sudden and urgent, breaking the ravine's silence. He moved to the side of the tank and began clawing at a hatch partially hidden under ice and snow. His barking grew faster, higher, edged with alarm rather than excitement. Ryan crouched beside him, heart pounding now for reasons he could not yet name. Then it came. From somewhere inside the tank, faint but unmistakable, there was a metallic click, a hollow, deliberate sound, like a mechanism shifting or something awakening after a long sleep. Ryan froze, every instinct screaming at once. Whatever lay beneath the snow was not finished with them yet. Ryan did not move for several seconds after the metallic click echoed from inside the tank. The sound was faint, almost delicate, yet it carried weight, the kind that settled deep in the chest and tightened muscles before thought could catch up. Arrow stood rigid beside the hull, silver-gray fur bristling along his spine, amber eyes fixed on the half-buried hatch as if daring whatever lay within to reveal itself. The winter sun poured into the ravine at a sharp angle, making the snow glow blindingly bright, but down here the light felt cold and thin, stripped of warmth. Ryan exhaled slowly, steadying himself, then reached for the compact field tools strapped at his belt, the same ones he had carried through deserts and mountains half a world away. Old habits returned without effort. Fear was acknowledged, catalogued, and set aside. Action came next. The hatch resisted at first, its edges frozen tight, but Ryan worked patiently, chipping away ice and packed snow with careful strikes that avoided unnecessary noise. The steel groaned softly as it yielded, not the scream of forced entry, but the reluctant sigh of something disturbed after a long sleep. When the hatch finally opened, there was no rush of air, no smell of fuel or decay, only a sterile stillness that felt wrong in a place claimed by nature. Ryan angled his body to shield the opening while Arrow shifted closer, nose low, drawing in short, testing breaths. Inside the tank there were no shells, no belts of ammunition, none of the grim tools the machine had been built to deliver. Instead, resting where a weapon rack should have been, sat a matte black Pelican case, its surface unscuffed, its seals intact, looking absurdly out of place amid rust and frost. It was clean, dry, recent. That realization struck Ryan harder than the tank itself. Someone had been here, not years ago, not even weeks, recently enough to leave no trace of age on the case. Ryan lifted it out carefully, surprised by its weight, the heft of something dense and deliberate. A combination lock sat flush against the lid, untouched by corrosion, numbers crisp and sharp. Arrow circled once, then ignored the case entirely, his attention snapping toward the ravine floor. He moved away from the tank with purpose, nose skimming the snow in short, precise passes. Ryan followed, eyes scanning the ground until he saw what Arrow had already read as clearly as printed words, a long, uneven drag mark cutting through the powder, leading away from the tank toward the tree line. It was not old, snow still slumped inward along its edges, not yet softened by sun or wind. Whoever had made it had struggled, pulling something heavy, boots slipping, stopping and starting. Arrow let out a low, warning rumble, not loud enough to carry far, but filled with urgency. Ryan's pulse quickened. This was no longer a discovery. It was an intrusion into an active story, one that did not want witnesses. They followed the trail only far enough to confirm its direction before Ryan forced himself to stop. Chasing blindly was how men walked into traps. He crouched, studying the snow for details, the tread pattern of boots, deep and aggressive, designed for traction. The faint impression of a knee pressed down, suggesting exhaustion or injury. And farther upslope, the clean, unmistakable bite of tire tracks crossing their hunting path at an angle. ATV tires, wide, deep, fresh enough that loose snow still clung to their edges. Ryan straightened slowly, scanning the ridge above them. The brightness of the snow made distance deceptive, flattening perspective until everything looked closer than it was. Somewhere out there, beyond the ravine, someone had driven off with purpose, confident enough to leave tracks behind. Ryan returned to the tank and examined the Pelican case more closely. Taped to its underside was a thin metal tag, no larger than a dog tag fragment, stamped with a short string of letters and numbers that meant nothing at all. First glance. He slipped it into his pocket, then reached back into the tank's interior, probing with gloved fingers until he felt paper. A photograph, stiff with cold but intact, came free in his hand. It showed the same tank, unmistakably the same scars and angles, but in a radically different place. A desert under a hard blue sky. Sun-baked sand replaced snow. Heat shimmer replaced frost. In one corner of the image, partially obscured by glare, was a corporate logo printed on a temporary panel bolted to the tank's side. Ryan recognized the style immediately. Private defense contractor, clean lines, aggressive branding, the kind of company that thrived in gray areas and answered questions with legal teams rather than explanations. His jaw tightened. This machine had not wandered here by accident. It had been moved, hidden, and maintained with intent. Arrow's ears flicked sharply. He lifted his head and stared upslope, body angling protectively in front of Ryan without being commanded. The dog's focus was intense now. No longer tracking scent but listening. Ryan felt it too, a shift in the air that had nothing to do with temperature. The ravine seemed suddenly exposed, its bright snow a liability rather than a comfort. Ryan slung the Pelican case across his shoulder, adjusting the strap so it lay tight against his back, and took one last look at the tank. The monster under the snow was no longer sleeping. It was a signpost, pointing toward something much larger and far more dangerous. The hike back toward his cabin was deliberate and indirect. Ryan chose open ground where the snow reflected light harshly, forcing any watcher to squint, and avoided the tree lines where shadows pooled thick and forgiving. Arrow stayed close, no longer ranging ahead, matching Ryan's pace with an awareness that spoke of shared unease. When they reached the ridgeline overlooking the valley, Ryan paused. From here, he could see his cabin, a dark, solid shape against the white expanse, smoke from the chimney rising straight into the clear sky. It looked peaceful, innocent, and suddenly, painfully vulnerable. That was when he saw it. At first, it was nothing more than a blemish against the brightness, a speck so small it could have been a trick of light. Ryan narrowed his eyes, shielding them with a gloved hand. The speck moved, smoothly, purposefully. No sound reached him, not even the faint buzz of civilian drones he had heard in town. This thing glided, adjusting its position with subtle precision, hovering high enough to avoid easy detection, but low enough to observe. Military grade. Ryan knew the difference the way a sailor knows the sea. His stomach dropped as understanding settled in. This was not coincidence. The tank, the tracks, the case, the drag marks, all of it had been found because he had been allowed to find it. Arrow let out a sharp single bark, then went silent, eyes locked on the distant shape. The drone hung there, an unblinking eye in the winter sun, oriented not toward the ravine they had just left, but directly toward the cabin. Ryan's cabin. His refuge, his last illusion of anonymity. He did not wave. He did not move. He simply watched as the drone lingered, then slowly drifted backward, retreating without urgency, as if confident that its message had been delivered. Ryan turned away from the ridge and started down the slope toward home, every step measured, every breath controlled. Whatever had been buried under the snow had just dragged him back into a world he thought he had left behind. And somewhere above, unseen now, but never truly gone, something was watching and waiting for his next move. Ryan reached the cabin while the day still held its breath. The winter light remained brutally bright, the snow reflecting it so fiercely that the world looked dipped in silver leaf. Every edge, roofline, fence post, pine needle, stood out with unnatural clarity. He paused before the door, listening. The forest offered only the soft whisper of wind and the faint creak of frozen branches. No voices, no engines, no careless sounds. That absence itself felt deliberate. Ryan unlocked the door, stepped inside, and secured it behind him with practiced speed, sliding the heavy bolt home, checking the frame, then drawing the thick curtains tight until the interior dimmed into a controlled half-light. He moved through the cabin as if it were a perimeter, not a home, checking corners, windows, and the small rear exit, his boots silent on the worn wood. The place was simple. A rough-hewn table scarred by years of use, a cast-iron stove squatting like a patient animal in the corner, shelves, lined with tools and supplies arranged with military precision. Ryan did not decorate. He prepared. Arrow followed him in and immediately positioned himself near the front window, body angled, head lifted, ears rotating like radar dishes. The dog's silver-gray coat caught what little light remained, giving him an almost spectral presence against the darker interior. He was tense now, in a way Ryan recognized instantly. This was not alert curiosity. This was pre-contact awareness. Arrow's muscles were tight beneath his fur, his breathing shallow and controlled, his gaze fixed on the tree line beyond the glass as if measuring distance and time. Ryan shrugged the pelican case from his shoulder and set it on the table. He stripped off his gloves, flexed his fingers once to bring feeling back into them, and opened the case. Inside, nestled in dense foam, lay a ruggedized military hard drive, its casing thick, angular, and clearly designed to survive far worse than snow and cold. Alongside it were folded documents sealed in plastic sleeves, shipping manifests, routing logs, and transfer authorizations stamped and signed with authority. At first glance, everything looked legitimate. The destinations listed were real, the dates were clean, the language was precise, bureaucratic, boring. That was what made Ryan uneasy. Real crimes hid behind perfect paperwork. He spread the documents out, scanning them with a trained eye. The cargo was described in deliberately vague terms: mechanical units, support hardware, training platforms. No serial numbers that could be easily traced, no explicit weapon classifications. It was the kind of language used when everyone involved knew exactly what was being moved and preferred not to say it out loud. Ryan's jaw tightened. He had seen this before in different forms, different theaters. War always needed paperwork, and corruption always learned to speak its language fluently. Ryan connected the hard drive to an old, durable laptop pulled from a drawer beneath the table. The machine was scratched, its casing dulled by age, but it had never failed him. The screen flickered to life, casting a pale glow across the room. The moment the system recognized the drive, a security interface filled the display. It was layered, complex, and unmistakably military-grade. Password fields nested inside authentication prompts. Encryption protocols stacked like walls. This wasn't something meant to be accessed casually. Ryan tried a few educated guesses. Dates, acronyms, the kind of things soldiers sometimes used when they thought they were being clever. Nothing. Each failed attempt returned him to the same cold, unyielding screen. He leaned back in the chair, exhaled slowly, and rubbed a hand over his beard. Whoever had built this system had not planned on dying easily. Or at all. Arrow shifted suddenly, a low whine vibrating in his chest. Ryan looked up in time to see the dog's head snap toward the window. Outside, the light had changed. The sun still hung above the horizon, but its angle had shifted, stretching shadows longer, thinner. Ryan moved to the window and parted the curtain just enough to see. The drone was back. It hovered above the treetops, barely visible against the glare of the snow-bright sky, its dark silhouette steady and controlled. It didn't dart or wobble. It simply observed. Ryan felt the familiar crawl of being measured, analyzed. This was not surveillance meant to intimidate openly. It was confirmation. A nod from one professional to another that said, "We see you." The drone made a slow, deliberate circle, then rose slightly and slid away, vanishing behind the ridge without a sound. Arrow let out a single sharp bark, then went silent again, eyes tracking the empty space where it had been. Ryan stepped back from the window and closed the curtain. He did not curse. He did not pace. Panic was a luxury for people who expected rescue. He reached for them stove, feeding it with split logs and coaxing a fire to life. The flames grew quickly, casting warm light that pushed back the cold shadows clinging to the cabin walls. Fire had a way of anchoring him, of reminding his body that warmth and survival were still possible. As the stove settled into a steady burn, Ryan returned to the laptop. He tried again, this time not to break the encryption, but to understand it. He mapped the structure, traced the logic, searching for patterns rather than shortcuts. Minutes stretched, then an hour. Arrow remained on watch, moving occasionally from window to window, his posture never fully relaxing. Outside, the forest seemed to lean closer. The light continued to fade, not into darkness yet, but into a blue-gray twilight that made distances deceptive. Ryan glanced at the clock on the laptop. Still too early for night. Too early for what his instincts were warning him about. He shut the laptop down and disconnected the drive, sliding it back into the Pelican case. There was time yet, but not much. He needed options. He needed information. And above all, he needed to stay ahead of whatever timetable the unseen watchers were operating on. Arrow froze. The sound reached Ryan a heartbeat later, the faint crunch of snow under weight, not a single step, not careless. It came in measured rhythm, spaced evenly, then paused, then resumed. More than one set of feet, controlled movement, a team. Ryan moved without thinking, extinguishing the cabin's interior lights and letting the fire dim behind the stove's iron door. He drew the curtains tighter, plunging the room into shadow broken only by thin lines of fading daylight. He retrieved his rifle from its rack and checked it by feel alone, the motions automatic and silent. The crunch came again, closer now, circling rather than approaching directly. Whoever they were, they knew better than to walk straight up to a door. Ryan crouched beside Arrow, one hand resting briefly on the dog's shoulder. Arrow's body vibrated with restrained energy, teeth bared slightly in a silent warning. Ryan breathed slowly through his nose, counting each exhale, letting the soldier he had tried to bury rise fully to the surface. The cabin, the fire, the quiet life, those were already slipping away. What remained was preparation. Outside, the snow crunched again, this time just beyond the tree line. The day had not yet surrendered to night, but the hunt had already begun. Ryan didn't wait for the first knock on the door. The moment the pattern of movement outside confirmed what his instincts already knew, he made the decision that separated survivors from casualties. He killed the fire, slung the Pelican case across his back, and opened the rear of the cabin just enough to slip into the blinding late afternoon light. The snow outside was still brilliant, the sky a hard winter blue, the sun low but fierce, throwing long shadows that stretched like black fingers across the ground. Arrow moved first, silent and fluid, his silver-gray body melting into the brightness as if he belonged to it. Ryan followed, closing the door without sound and turning immediately into the trees instead of away from them, choosing chaos over predictability. They moved fast but not blindly, weaving through snow-laden pines, cutting diagonally downslope to avoid being boxed in. Ryan's breath came steady and controlled, his long strides economical, his boots landing where Arrow's path had already tested the ground. Behind them, the forest remained deceptively calm, no shouted commands, no rushing pursuit. That worried him more than noise ever could. Professionals did not chase blindly, they herded. And Ryan could feel the invisible pressure of that herding now, like a tightening noose made of patience and planning. They slowed only when Arrow abruptly veered left and stopped beside a thick lodgepole pine. The dog lowered his head and sniffed the trunk, then let out a low, unmistakable growl. Ryan crouched beside him and saw it immediately, a small, deliberate marking carved into the bark at shoulder height. It wasn't graffiti or a hunter's sign. It was precise, 2 short diagonal cuts intersected by a third, shallow but clean, a directional marker, military style, used to indicate movement corridors, rally points, or kill zones depending on context. Ryan's jaw clenched. Whoever was hunting him was not improvising. This was a trained team using doctrine, adapting it to terrain they had likely studied in advance. "Wolves," Ryan murmured under his breath, "wearing boots." Arrow's ears twitched as if he understood the tone, if not the words. The dog moved again, angling away from the marker and deeper into the ravine system that cut like scars through the forest floor. Ryan followed, committing fully now to a course of action that carried risk but also opportunity. If they were being tracked, then the trackers had expectations. Breaking those expectations was the only way to regain initiative. They reached the ravine near dusk, the light still strong but slanted, turning the snow into a field of fire and shadow. The tank loomed ahead, half buried and silent, its presence as wrong now as it had been earlier, but also strangely familiar. Ryan circled it cautiously, scanning for fresh disturbances. Arrow ignored the hull entirely and went straight to the interior, slipping beneath the open hatch with surprising ease. Ryan was about to call him back when the dog stopped and barked once, short, sharp, controlled, an alert, not a warning. Ryan slid in beside him, the confined space magnifying every sound. Arrow pawed insistently at the base of the driver's seat, where rust and debris had collected unevenly. Ryan reached down and felt it, a narrow seam, almost invisible, masked by grime and shadow. Using the tip of his field knife, he pried carefully until a hidden panel popped free. Inside lay a thin strip of polymer, flexible but tough, sealed against moisture. Printed on it in faded black were a date and a short string of alphanumeric characters, not random, structured, deliberate, a key. Ryan exhaled slowly, a grim satisfaction cutting through the tension. "Good boy," he whispered, brushing Arrow's neck once before tucking the strip safely into his chest pocket. He didn't linger. Every second here increased the odds of discovery. They withdrew from the tank and moved uphill to a rocky outcrop that offered partial concealment and a clear line of sight. Ryan pulled out his compact field laptop, shielding the screen with his body as it powered up. The wind had picked up slightly, carrying the dry scent of snow and pine. Ryan connected the hard drive and entered the characters exactly as they appeared on the polymer strip, then added the date and military format. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the interface shifted. One layer of encryption dissolved, replaced by a clean directory tree. Ryan felt his pulse spike, not with relief, but with the sharpened focus that came when a situation escalated rather than resolved. He scrolled quickly, absorbing names and timestamps. Then he saw them. Aegis, Bozeman drop. The words sat there without drama, but they hit like a blow. Aegis was no rumor. It was a private defense contractor with a spotless public image and a shadowed reputation among those who knew how wars were really funded and fed. Bozeman drop meant this. Place, these woods, were not a hiding spot, but a node, a transfer point. The tank wasn't abandoned. It was parked, stored, waiting. Arrow stiffened suddenly, head lifting, nose testing the air. Ryan closed the laptop just as a low mechanical hum crept into awareness, barely audible beneath the wind. He looked up in time to see the screen flicker back on for a fraction of a second, a new window forcing itself open. A video file began to load, pixelated and unstable. For an instant, Ryan caught a glimpse of a woman seated behind a glass desk, her posture straight, her dark hair pulled back tight, her expression composed to the point of coldness. Then the image froze. The screen went black. A single line of text appeared in stark white. IP logged. Ryan swore softly, the sound lost in the open air. That was the moment everything changed. He didn't need to see more. He didn't need confirmation. The system had done exactly what it was designed to do: identify curiosity and mark it. Somewhere, someone now knew where he was, or at least where his signal had been. Arrow let out a low, uneasy sound, his body pressing closer to Ryan's leg. The wolves had teeth, and now they had a scent. Ryan shut the laptop down and wiped it clean of snow, his mind already racing through options, contingencies, escape vectors. Staying here was no longer viable, neither was returning to the cabin. The hunt had shifted from observation to engagement. He scanned the tree line one last time, committing landmarks to memory, then rose and slung his pack higher on his shoulders. "We move," he said quietly, not to Arrow alone, but to himself. The dog responded immediately, turning east, away from the familiar paths and into terrain that promised difficulty and concealment in equal measure. Behind them, unseen but very real, the first true circle of the hunt tightened. The snow made everything honest. It reflected light without mercy, stripping shadows thin and exposing every movement as if the land itself demanded truth. Ryan chose a high, wind-swept shelf of granite above the ravine, open enough to see trouble coming and cold enough to discourage lingering. Arrow lay beside him, silver-gray coat dusted white, chest rising and falling in slow, disciplined breaths. The dog's eyes never fully closed. They had learned that rest did not mean blindness. Ryan set the laptop on his knees and brought it to life, angling the screen away from the trees. The first layer of encryption was gone now, the directory open like a door cracked just wide enough to invite danger. He began with the manifests, lines of text scrolled past, weights, volumes, pallet counts, language designed to soothe auditors and lull conscience. But Ryan read past the words to the intent behind them. He saw mismatched tolerances, impossible timelines, and routing codes that made sense. Only if the destination was not what the paperwork claimed. Surface-to-air components described as stabilizers, optics listed as calibration units, crates whose declared mass exceeded any reasonable configuration unless they held something dense, metallic, and lethal. The snow's glare bounced off the screen, and Ryan squinted, jaw set. This was not theft. This was supply chain laundering. Someone had taken the clean arteries of legitimate logistics and rerouted blood to a diseased heart. Arrow shifted, ears flicking. Ryan paused and scanned the tree line. Nothing moved. Wind combed the pines, lifting spindrift into brief silver ghosts. He returned to the files, opened a folder marked comms, and selected the first audio log. The waveform appeared, neat and compressed. He pressed play. A woman's voice filled the small space between them, calm, clipped, and cold as poured steel. It carried authority without effort, the kind that did not need volume to command obedience. She spoke in short phrases, precise and final, as if decisions were stones dropped into water and ripples were someone else's problem. Her diction was immaculate, her tone devoid of warmth. Ryan pictured her instinctively. Tall posture, controlled movements, hair restrained rather than styled, eyes that measured rather than invited. She sounded like someone who had learned early that sentiment complicated victory. A man replied, his English shaped by an Eastern European accent that hardened certain consonants and softened others. His voice was lower, textured by years of cigarettes and gravel roads, confident in the way of a broker who had survived long enough to believe luck favored him. He spoke of quantities and windows, of deniability and insurance, of how many hands would never touch the product and how many mouths would never speak. The woman cut him off once, sharply, when he drifted into bravado. She reminded him of consequences. He laughed once, then didn't again. "Ryan, stop the audio." His fingers were steady, but his shoulders had crept higher, tension coiling there like wire. He opened the next file. The video loaded with a stutter, then resolved into a clean image. A modern office, all glass and pale wood, winter light diffused through floor-to-ceiling windows. Behind a wide desk sat the woman from the audio, Isabella Reed. The name was stamped on a discreet plaque at the desk's edge. She appeared to be in her late 40s, skin pale and unblemished, hair a dark glossy brown pulled back into a severe knot. Her face was angular, cheekbones sharp, lips thin and precise. She wore a tailored jacket that fit like armor, not hiding her frame so much as declaring control over it. When she spoke, her eyes didn't wander. They locked on the man opposite her, an off-camera presence whose silhouette flickered occasionally in the reflection of glass. Isabella Reed was the CEO of a private defense conglomerate with a reputation for immaculate compliance and aggressive innovation. Publicly, she spoke of stability, deterrence, and shareholder value. In the video, she spoke of prices and delivery windows, of rerouted inspections and friendly ports. She referenced the manifest Ryan had just read, calling them by internal nicknames. She signed off with a nod that felt like a guillotine falling. The deal was done. Somewhere beyond the frame, hands shook. Ryan ended the video and closed the laptop. The cold bit immediately at his fingers, grounding him. He stared out across the white valley, letting the implications settle. This was not a rogue operation. This was policy dressed as profit. Someone inside the tank, someone who had crewed it, maintained it, or moved it, had discovered the truth and paid for it. The tank wasn't just storage, it was a coffin. And now the secret had chosen a new bearer. Arrow's head lifted sharply. His hackles rose, the silver fur along his spine standing like frost-hardened blades. He did not bark. He didn't growl. He stared. Ryan followed his gaze and saw it, a tiny glint among the trees, a spark that winked once and vanished. Not light on snow, not ice. It was the brief, unmistakable flash of glass catching sun at a precise angle. An optic, a lens, someone testing alignment. Ryan did not move. He let his breath slow, counted heartbeats, and lowered his profile until his body merged with the rock's shadow. Arrow mirrored him, muscles coiled but silent, eyes never leaving the place where the glint had appeared. The forest held its breath. Ryan felt the old calculus click into place. Distance, angle, wind, likely positions. The wolves had stopped herding. One had knelt. He considered his options and dismissed the loud ones. He would not fire first. He would not give them a sound to triangulate. He slid the laptop into his pack and sealed it, then eased a hand to Arrow's collar. The dog's warmth bled into his glove, steadying. They would move when the watcher blinked. The beta. Glint came again, lower this time, as if the shooter had adjusted. Ryan waited until a gust of wind lifted snow into the air like thrown flour. In that brief chaos, he rose, angled away, and flowed down slope, using the terrain to mask his exit. Arrow stayed glued to his leg, silent as a rumor. They did not run. Running drew lines. They drifted, letting the land swallow them. By the time they reached the shelter of a dense stand of firs, Ryan felt the pressure ease a fraction. He did not mistake it for safety. He checked Arrow quickly. Ears, paws, flank. The dog was intact, eyes bright with purpose. Ryan allowed himself one thin breath of relief. He glanced back once. The ridge lay empty, innocent as ever. If someone had watched them leave, they had done so without a trace. That was the point. Ryan set a new course east, away from the tank and the cabin alike. The snow kept shining, pitiless and beautiful. Betrayal had a smell to it, oil, metal, and money, and it clung to him now. Somewhere ahead lay answers he didn't want and choices he couldn't refuse. Arrow moved first, nose into the wind. The first shot did not sound like thunder. It sounded like the sky cracking its knuckles. Snow burst upward in a white geyser less than a foot from Ryan's knee, the impact sharp and surgical. He did not think. He moved. Ryan threw his weight into Arrow, wrapping an arm around the dog's chest and rolling sideways, just as the second round tore through the space where his head had been a heartbeat earlier. Bark exploded from the trees, splinters spinning like shrapnel, branches snapping and raining down in a chaos of sound and white light. The ambush had been waiting for stillness, for hesitation. Ryan gave it neither. They slid into a narrow drainage cut hidden beneath a deceptive skin of snow. Ryan taking the brunt of the fall, his shoulders slamming into frozen earth. Arrow landed on top of him for a fraction of a second, then twisted free, already facing uphill, teeth bared, a low, feral snarl vibrating through his chest. More shots followed, controlled bursts now, not panic fire. Whoever was shooting knew exactly where Ryan had been and exactly where he might go next. Professionals, wolves, just as he had named them. "Down!" Ryan hissed, not loudly but with authority. Arrow obeyed instantly, flattening himself against the ground, his silver-gray coat blending eerily with the snow-packed walls of the gully. Ryan crawled, pulling himself deeper into the cut, using elbows and boots, keeping his profile low. The bright winter light was a curse and a blessing. It revealed movement but also erased contrast, making depth hard to judge. Above them, an engine revved briefly, then cut. An ATV repositioning, another layer closing. Ryan forced his breathing to slow. He waited for the rhythm of the shooters to reveal itself, counted the space between reports, the angles implied by impacts. When the firing paused, he moved again, dragging Arrow with him until the gully narrowed into a culvert choked with ice and dead grass. There, shielded from direct line of sight, he risked a glance upslope. He saw figures moving between trees, men in winter gear, faces hidden by goggles and masks, rifles held with the relaxed readiness of people who trusted their training. He felt a flicker of grim recognition. This was not local muscle. This was contract work. They broke contact not by fleeing, but by vanishing. Ryan angled through a stand of aspens, their pale trunks glaring in the sun, then cut across open snow where any pursuit would be visible from a distance. He did not run. Running invited chase. Instead, he walked with purpose, changing direction only when terrain offered cover, letting Arrow choose micropaths that avoided pooling scent. The dog worked tirelessly, nose low, ears swiveling, leading them into pockets of moving air where wind scoured tracks clean within minutes. Hours passed like that, the sun arcing slowly, the cold biting harder. Ryan pulled the laptop during a brief pause beneath a rock overhang, shielding it from glare with his body. He reopened the directory and scanned deeper this time, ignoring manifests and comms, hunting for contingencies. He found them buried in a folder labeled redundancies, a word used by people who assumed failure was inevitable. Coordinates glowed on the screen, precise, clinical, a backup site, an old access point beneath the city, tied to a defunct industrial spur that fed an abandoned mine complex on the outskirts of Bozeman. It wasn't romantic, it was practical. Layers of concrete, earth, and forgotten tunnels. A place to hide data, a place to hide people. Ryan closed the laptop and committed the route to memory. The wolves were pressing now. He could feel it in the way Arrow's pace quickened, in the distant whine of engines drifting on the wind, in the faint electronic chirps that didn't belong to birds. Trackers, scanners, tools designed to find heat, metal, signal. Ryan countered by choosing openness. They crossed bright, empty stretches where nothing could move unseen, where the snow reflected light so harshly it punished optics. He stayed in the open longer than felt comfortable, forcing anyone watching to commit if they wanted a shot. They reached the city's edge as the day leaned toward late afternoon, Bozeman's outskirts quiet under a blanket of white. Ryan skirted roads, moved through industrial backlots where rusted equipment lay half-buried, relics of enterprises that had bled out years ago. Arrow led him to a chain-link fence torn open at the bottom, the metal bent back just enough for a man and a dog to pass. Beyond it, a concrete structure squatted low against the snow, its surface stained by age and neglect. A ventilation stack protruded from the roof like a broken tooth. This was the place. Ryan slowed. The air here smelled different. Old oil, damp stone, cold metal. Arrow's hackles lifted again, not in alarm but in focus. He circled once, sniffed the ground near the entrance, then froze. Ryan followed his gaze. There, pressed. Into the snow leading to the heavy steel door were fresh boot prints. Deep, clean, recent. Someone had come through here not long ago. The door itself sat ajar, open just enough to betray human presence, a dark seam cutting through the white. Ryan's hand tightened on his rifle. He did not rush. He studied the prints, stride length, weight distribution. At least 2 people, one heavier, one cautious, not a maintenance crew. He signaled Arrow to stay close, then eased toward the door, placing each foot carefully to avoid noise. The snow here was thinner, the ground beneath uneven. He paused at the threshold, listening. From within came a faint echo of movement, metal on concrete, the distant murmur of voices too low to make out. Ryan leaned back into the light for a moment, letting the cold burn his lungs, letting his mind clear. He was done reacting. The hunt had begun in earnest, and now it was pulling them underground into a place where daylight meant nothing and sound traveled. In treacherous ways, Arrow pressed against his leg, solid and ready, amber eyes bright with a purpose that matched his own. Ryan slipped inside. The door creaked softly behind them, closing the world of snow and light to a narrow slit. Ahead lay darkness, layered and waiting. Whatever secrets the wolves were guarding, they were close now. And whatever price was owed for knowing them, Ryan understood he was about to be asked to pay. Darkness swallowed them the moment the door sealed behind Ryan. But it was not blindness. He flipped the switch on his night vision goggles, and the world bloomed into sharp phosphor-green clarity. Snow dust clung to Arrow's coat, catching stray light and glowing faintly like stardust. Ryan's own breath fogged and vanished, measured and quiet. He added a narrow beam flashlight, keeping it low and angled, letting reflective frost on the concrete and steel ribs throw just enough illumination to read the space without announcing them. The tunnel sloped down and widened, a throat of old infrastructure that smelled of damp stone, oil residue, and time. The soundscape changed immediately. Every footstep threatened to betray them. Every drip became a metronome. Arrow moved first, a living radar. His gait was slow and deliberate now, head tilted, ears tracking micro-echoes that human hearing ignored. The dog's silver-gray frame looked carved from the green light, muscles rolling. Beneath fur as he tested air currents and pressure changes. Ryan followed with the discipline of someone who had learned to trust another being with his life. He kept his shoulders square to the walls, rifle tucked, elbows in, minimizing profile. The labyrinth opened into a junction where multiple tunnels branched like veins. Arrow paused, sniffed, then nudged Ryan left, away from a faint crunch of gravel that arrived half a second too late to be accidental. They moved in pulses, advancing during moments of ambient noise, water dripping, distant machinery creaking, and freezing when silence threatened to amplify them. At the next turn, Arrow stopped and crouched, belly to the ground. Ryan mirrored him and listened. Voices, low, clipped, professional, floated down the main artery. Boots scuffed concrete. Someone adjusted a sling. The wolves were inside now, hunting in their element. Ryan chose a side passage barely wide enough for two. He killed the flashlight and relied on NVG, alone, counting steps, memorizing seams in the wall. The passage pinched, then opened into a service alcove choked with rusted tools and a collapsed cart. Arrow's nose brushed the floor, then lifted sharply. He gave a barely audible whine, alert, not fear. Ryan edged forward and saw a silhouette separate from the darkness ahead. A lone sentry stood with his back turned, posture relaxed, weight on one leg. He was tall and lean, winter gear over tactical layers, beard stubble catching the green glow when he shifted. Complacency had crept in. The man thought the hunt was happening elsewhere. Ryan closed the distance without sound. When he struck, it was precise and quiet. An elbow to the base of the skull, a guided fall, a hand catching the body before it could clatter. The man sagged, unconscious, breath shallow but steady. Ryan stripped him quickly, a compact radio clipped to the vest, spare magazines, and a newer set of night vision goggles with superior resolution. He swapped. Goggles, the world snapping into even crisper detail, edges sharpening, depth returning. Arrow watched the tunnel mouth, teeth just visible, ready. Ryan keyed the radio and listened. Static, then a voice, tight, controlled, laced with impatience. "Status?" Another voice replied, younger, strained. "Contact lost. Sector C compromised." The leader cut in, colder than the rest. "Burn witnesses. Collapse the site." The words landed with finality. They weren't here to retrieve data anymore. They were here to erase. Ryan's jaw set. He slung the radio back and signaled Arrow forward. The labyrinth shifted character as they descended. Support beams rotted, walls reinforced with newer steel plates bolted over older scars. They followed a maintenance line marked by faded paint until Arrow halted before a steel door set into a recess. A small placard hung askew. Maintenance. Authorized personnel only. Ryan eased it open. Inside, the room felt like a shrine to redundancy. Shelves held sealed binders wrapped in waterproof sleeves, their labels clinical and damning. A Pelican case identical to the one from the tank sat on a bench, scuffed but intact. Beside it, mounted on the wall, was a satellite phone. Old but robust, its antenna folded, its casing scarred by use. Ryan exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The physical backup, proof that didn't rely on electrons alone. He worked fast. He photographed labels, then packed the binders into his rucksack, the weight a tangible reminder of what truth cost. He slid a slim memory card into an inner pocket, video evidence, the kind that ended careers and started wars. Arrow circled once, then planted himself at the doorway, ears pricked, posture rigid. Ryan had just cinched the pack closed when Arrow's growl tore through the room, a deep, vibrating warning that raised the hair on Ryan's arms. Metal scraped on concrete beyond the door. A boot dragged, a breath hissed, then a blade of white light cut across the floor as a tactical flashlight swept the entrance, pausing, probing. Ryan flattened against the wall, heart rate controlled but high. He counted footsteps. 2. No. 3. One heavier, moving with authority. The leader. The flashlight beam climbed, painting the shelves, the binders, the satellite phone. A voice murmured, "Close now." "Clear it." Arrow held his ground, muscles trembling with restraint, eyes locked on the light. Ryan shifted his weight, angling for the hinge side, planning a burst, a distraction, anything to break contact. The beam snapped toward Arrow, and the dog lunged, not barking, not charging blindly, but stepping forward with a snarl that promised violence. The flashlight jerked back. A gun clacked, safety off. Ryan moved. He surged through the doorway, shoulder first, knocking the beam aside, firing a single suppressed shot that shattered the light and plunged the corridor into green chaos. Shouts erupted. Boots scrambled. Arrow, darted low and left, teeth flashing, a gray blur that snapped at a leg and vanished before a shot could line up. Ryan dragged the leader's rifle muzzle wide and struck, the butt cracking against a helmet. The man stumbled, but didn't fall. He was strong, disciplined, scarred by years that had taught him pain was temporary. Another mercenary fired blindly. The round sparked off steel inches from Ryan's head. He ducked, rolled, came up behind a pillar, breath steady. Arrow reappeared at his side, flanks heaving, eyes blazing. The leader barked orders, voice iron hard, rallying his team, already adjusting to the resistance. They were good, too good to fight head on. Ryan broke contact again, not retreating, but repositioning. He tossed a binder down a side tunnel and kicked it, letting paper slap concrete. 2 men took the bait. Arrow guided Ryan the opposite way, through a crawlspace where the ceiling pressed close and the air smelled of rust. They burst into another chamber. This one larger, its ceiling lost in shadow, old machinery hulking like dead animals. Ryan spotted a ladder and climbed, hauling Arrow after him. At the top, a catwalk rattled underfoot. He cut the ladder and sent it crashing down, buying seconds. He could hear the leader below, voice calm now, dangerous. "Seal exits, prep charges." Ryan didn't hesitate. He keyed the satellite phone, fingers moving from memory. The screen blinked alive, searching for signal. Arrow paced the catwalk edge, growling at shadows. The phone connected. "Send," Ryan whispered, and dumped the data, images, video, documents into the void, trusting that someone, somewhere, would receive it before the ground shook. The light behind them flared again, another tactical beam slicing upward. Ryan grabbed Arrow's collar and ran along the catwalk toward a maintenance door marked with a faded arrow. The whisper of steel followed them, the sound of charges being armed, of destiny clicking into place. They plunged through the door into another dark artery of the maze as the voices rose behind them. Arrow barked once, sharp and defiant. Ryan ran, the pack heavy with truth, the air trembling with what was about to fall. The final confrontation came not with chaos, but with clarity. The labyrinth beneath Bozeman seemed to hold its breath as Ryan and Arrow burst into the central maintenance chamber, a wide concrete bowl reinforced with steel ribs that vanished into shadow above. Emergency lights flickered, painting the space in intermittent white and sickly green, bright enough to carve faces out of darkness, harsh enough to erase mercy. Ryan's shoulder burned from a grazing hit he had taken moments earlier while shielding Arrow, the pain sharp and insistent, each pulse a reminder that time was running out. The leader stepped into view with deliberate calm, a man in his early 40s with a tall, angular frame and a face cut hard by experience rather than age. His beard was trimmed short, flecked with gray, his jaw tight with discipline. There was a scar along his left cheek, pale and clean, the kind left by shrapnel or a blade, not an accident. His eyes were cold but not cruel, professional eyes, shaped by years of orders followed and lives weighed against objectives. This was not a thug. This was a man who believed in systems, even broken ones. His rifle came up smoothly, muzzle tracking Ryan's center mass with lethal patience. "Drop it," the man said, voice even, almost weary. "You've done enough damage." Ryan raised his hands slowly, the rifle slipping from his fingers and clattering against concrete. He could feel Arrow trembling beside him, not from fear, but from coiled intent. Ryan met the leader's gaze and saw something flicker there. Recognition, perhaps. Two soldiers from different sides of the same poisoned river. A shot rang out anyway. It was not the leader's. It came from the flank, wild and panicked, and Ryan reacted on instinct, twisting toward Arrow, throwing his body sideways to shield the dog. The round tore through his shoulder, white-hot pain exploding outward, dropping him to one knee. His vision swam, but he stayed upright, teeth clenched, refusing to fall. The leader turned sharply, fury flashing across his controlled mask as he barked an order that came too late. Arrow moved. The German Shepherd launched himself with a force that seemed impossible for his size, a silver-gray blur streaking through flickering light. He slammed into the leader's gun arm, jaws locking with precision, born of loyalty and training learned in silence. The rifle spun away, skidding across the floor. The leader grunted in pain, staggered, then went down hard as Arrow drove him backward, teeth clamped, muscles rippling beneath his rare silver coat. It was not rage that guided Arrow, but purpose. Protect, neutralize, end the threat. Ryan forced himself forward, ignoring the agony screaming through his shoulder. He tackled the remaining mercenary before the man could fire again, wrestling him to the ground, wrenching the weapon free. The fight was brutal and brief. When it ended, the room fell silent except for Ryan's labored breathing and the low, warning growl. Arrow kept trained on the leader pinned beneath him. "Enough," Ryan rasped, voice rough but steady. The leader raised his free hand slowly, palm open, eyes never leaving Arrow's teeth inches from his throat. Ryan bound him with zip ties stripped from a fallen vest, cinching them tight, methodical even through pain. He checked Arrow quickly. No blood, no limp, only eyes bright with adrenaline and devotion. Ryan pressed his forehead briefly against the dog's, a wordless promise passing between them. Then he reached for the satellite phone. The device felt heavier than it should have, as if carrying the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Ryan powered it on, waited for the signal, and dialed from memory. The line connected after 2 rings. "Carter," a man's voice answered, cautious but clear. "Ben Carter," Ryan said, breath steadying. "You don't know me. My name is Ryan Walker. I'm a former Navy SEAL. I have evidence, manifests, communications, video. It ties Aegis Tactical Solutions to illegal weapons transfers and terrorist networks. I'm sending it now." There was a pause, then a sharp intake of breath. "Send everything," Carter said, urgency slicing through restraint, "and stay where you are." Ryan transmitted the files, watching the progress bar crawl forward, each percentage point a small victory. When it finished, he slumped against the wall, letting the pain finally have its say. Arrow pressed close, a solid warmth at his side. The response was swift. By the time dawn broke over Bozeman, painting the snow in pale gold, federal vehicles lined the access road above the old industrial site. Tactical teams moved with controlled speed, securing tunnels, extracting prisoners, cataloging evidence. Isabella Reed was arrested in her Virginia estate before the sun reached its peak, led away in cuffs, her composed mask finally cracked by reality. Aegis Tactical Solutions collapsed under the weight of exposure, executives scrambling as sealed indictments unfurled. The tank's crew, written off as casualties of a forgotten accident, were cleared and honored, lies burned away in the clean light of proof. Weeks later, winter still ruled Montana, but the cold no longer felt hostile. Ryan sat on the porch of a new cabin outside Bozeman, wood smoke curling into the bright sky. His shoulder was healing, a thick bandage beneath the familiar lines of his Navy working uniform, the digital camouflage unbroken, worn not as armor now, but as acknowledgement. Arrow lay at his feet, head resting against Ryan's boot, silver-gray fur catching the sun until it gleamed like a medal. The dog looked older somehow, not in years, but in dignity. Ryan stared out across the snow-covered land, breathing deep, feeling the quiet settle in his bones. He was no longer running. He was no longer hiding. The promise he had made to the dead, to the truth, to the dog who had never left his side had been kept. For the first time in a long while, this place felt like home. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly, on four loyal paws, in a frozen forest, at the exact moment a broken soul is ready to give up. In Ryan's darkest hours, it was not strength alone that saved him. It was faith expressed through action, through loyalty, through the courage to protect instead of flee. Perhaps that was God's hand at work, not removing the danger, but placing the right companion beside him to walk through it. In our own lives, we may never face tanks, mercenaries, or hidden conspiracies, but we all face fear. We all face moments when the truth feels too heavy, when silence feels safer, when walking away seems easier than doing what's right. And in those moments, maybe God doesn't ask us to be perfect, only to be faithful. Faithful to truth, faithful to love, faithful to those who stand beside us when the world turns cold. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you, you are not alone. Even when the path is dark, even when the snow blinds your way, God can still guide your steps, sometimes through the quiet loyalty of another soul. May God bless you and your family. May He protect those who feel lost tonight, and may He place loyal hearts in your path when you need them most. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs hope. Leave a comment. We read them, and your words matter. And subscribe to the channel for more stories of faith, loyalty, courage, and second chances. God bless you. Your journey is not over yet.